Welcome everyone to another episode of What's on the Cool Pot. We are on Cool Pot TV on YouTube, and you can also catch us on Facebook. My name is Ray Francis. I'm joined here by Jason. There is an I in Team Timothy.
What's going on, people?
It's a great day, Jason. And we welcome all our faithful friends and listeners to What's on the Cool Pot. We have a great topic today. The pot is boiling on the coal pot, and today we are all talk about LIAT, the Caribbean airline, and
LIAT.
We have a great topic ahead. Today we're going to ask and answer three important questions. One, should Caribbean governments invest more in LIAT? Is the first question. Two, should employees of LIAT take more of a pay cut? We have some breaking news we want to talk about around that. And three, should LIAT be privatized, or should we have more competition in the airline market in the Eastern Caribbean? All coming up on What's on the Cool Pot. Today's podcast is brought to you by JD's Natural, run by our very good friend Jody Dublin Dangleben, where you can find natural products for your hair and skin, available at Fresh Market or Jolly's Pharmacy. Also brought to you by Popular Trucking's Satisfaction Guaranteed, or double your trash back. And by Quicklink Productions. You will notice that you're seeing Jason a lot clearer today. Lighting was provided by Quicklink Productions. So check out our local sponsors, JD's Natural, Popular Trucking, Quicklink Productions. And if you run a small business, let us know. Hit us up at the Cool Pot. We are more than happy to tell others what you're doing. Now back to the podcast. Welcome back to What's on the Cool Pot. Remember to support, as we said, our local sponsors, support local businesses. First question though, for What's on the Cool Pot, Jason, should Caribbean governments invest more in LIAT?
Boy, now you would think that would be a simple answer, but it really isn't. But my gut feeling is hell no.
Wow. It sounds like it's a simple answer from you. Why not? Why shouldn't Caribbean governments invest more in LIAT?
At the end of the day, in the Caribbean, we live in a capitalist society, really. We operate as capitalist societies, capitalist governments. And the whole point of capitalism is the strong survive, the weak die out. Now, if LIAT has been underperforming for all these years, as a finance man, Ray, how much good money you going to throw after old money before you decide you need to cut your losses? There must be a breaking point. And I think we're at that point where it's not that we don't need a Caribbean airline, but we need to start from scratch. LIAT just needs to fold and start fresh. Get rid of all that old debt, just start fresh. Because we're just gonna keep dumping money into a black hole, and any physicist out there will tell you what happens in black holes. It sucks everything in and nothing goes out.
Well, we have our first picture of a black hole now, which is amazing. And I have to say, it looks nothing like LIAT. Let me just add that too. The thing is, I disagree. And I think that has become a feature on the Cool Pot, that there's a lot that we disagree on. I think Caribbean governments should be investing more in LIAT, and for several reasons, and we'll talk about some of those today. But mainly because I believe where LIAT is at is not just a one-person problem or challenge. This is not all on LIAT. There are some things LIAT have not done well, and I think we'll get a chance to talk about those. But I think some of the challenges have been because of the ownership of LIAT, which essentially is the Caribbean governments, and it's been because some of the Caribbean governments who have not come on board with ownership, while LIAT continues to serve those islands. So for those reasons, I feel like as if these Caribbean governments should continue to support LIAT from that first standpoint. And the second standpoint is, I generally don't believe in too big to fail, but I think LIAT is such an important cog for regional and for interregional travel that if we allow LIAT to fail without a clear plan as to what will rise in its place, I'm afraid that the economic effects could be more devastating than if we have a sort of a concerted, deliberate, and thoughtful investment in LIAT.
But
and
Ray,
that's where...
wait a
I'm
while.
sorry?
I never said you shouldn't have a plan for when it for letting it close down, you know. I'm not like just let it close down and hope for the best, cross your fingers. You have a concise plan that this is what we are going to do. We are going to let it fail. We are going to start up a new company. We are going to acquire the planes that they used to have at such and such a price, etc. It's not just fail and throw your hands up in the air. It's failure with a plan. I hate to use this word, but I'm sure you'll understand this phrase. But I'm sure you'll understand. Trust the process. If you have a process, trust the process.
But and I'm not ready to give up on LIAT yet. The first thing I'm going to sort of talk about, Jason, and maybe you can join me on this journey, is I want to talk about some of the things about LIAT that are good. Because as we get into this discussion, I think there'll be several things about LIAT that people will complain about. But I think one thing about LIAT that is good that we have to sort of give LIAT props for, knock on wood, is LIAT runs a very safe operation. Ultimately, I think LIAT has invested and cared a lot about safety. They've been flying in these islands for a long time. They have some challenging airports to land in. People are always very complimentary of LIAT pilots, how hard they work, the difficult conditions they work under, and ultimately LIAT delivers passengers to their destinations safely. That's an absolute plus for LIAT. And fundamentally, that's what airlines are supposed to do. So fundamentally,
okay, wait a minute.
LIAT,
So let me ask you a question, Ray.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not knocking them. I agree 90% with what you say.
Mm-hmm.
However, have you seen some of the roads we drive on? How more people don't die on our roads in the Caribbean is, you know, the grace of God. So maybe it's just the grace of God looking over the Caribbean because technically we pray a lot.
Look. You're not gonna get me to debate against God, okay? My Sunday school teacher might be listening, so you're not gonna get me to debate against God. But as a side note, by the way, in Dominica, and this was a story that came out a few years ago, in Dominica, the leading cause of death for people, I believe, under the age of 30 or under the age of 25, was in fact road accidents. We've lost, I think each of us knows someone in Dominica who has died on the road, or knows someone who has died on the road. And often very young people, and often in tragic and heartbreaking circumstances. I don't think LIAT safety has been by happenstance. I think it has been something that has been deliberate and concerted and thoughtful. I think the modernizing of the fleet, for example, was part fuel efficiency and overall efficiencies with new aircraft, but also considering safety as well as the fleet became older. So that's something that we have to give LIAT credit for, that customers get to and passengers get to where they're going, and they get to where they're going safely. And LIAT has a good caliber. And everybody says, look, I don't know how we measure the quality of pilots, but I think everybody always says, oh, you know, the LIAT pilots do a really good job and the landings are often great and so on. And people generally have a good flight experience once they are in the air. Once they've actually left the gate and they're in the air and they're landing, people generally have a good flight experience. So I think we have to give LIAT props for that to start with. Would you agree?
100%. I cannot argue that. I've never, I think if they've had any accident, it was way back when we were probably younger. I don't recall any accident in recent time with the aircraft.
But the soft product, though, other parts of the product, the overall experience. I mean, I checked out LIAT on TripAdvisor. LIAT has a rating on TripAdvisor of 2.5. I think, Jason, you and I could start an airline tomorrow and we'd have a better rating of 2.5. I mean, LIAT goes by names of leave island anytime, luggage in any terminal. I don't know if I heard this one or I came up with it, but as I was thinking about today, late in all time zones is another one. I think
I know late in all transactions.
Late in all transactions. And as I went through TripAdvisor, tourists were given the headline of or travelers. The headline was "The Journey from Hell. Never fly LIAT again." And those are the sorts of ratings that LIAT. So LIAT has a significant reputational problem that has to be addressed if we're going to ask Caribbean governments to put any money back in. And those are things that have nothing to do with money per se, just the overall customer experience, improving timeliness. When the flights are late, good customer service, people who know how to sort of explain difficult situations to customers and accommodate them in a way that still make you feel valued, pleasant flight experiences, and so on. Those are things LIAT really suffers with. And I don't think it takes a significant insertion of capital to improve in those areas. Now, to be fair, LIAT has improved its on-time performance. That has improved significantly. They're in the 80% now, and so on. The last few LIAT flights I took this year, they were all on time. It was all an overall good experience. I think all except one flight was on time.
I
But
would
really,
actually say over the last 2 to 3 years, they've really improved. Previous to that, it was you're always late, but I over the last few years, they've been on time, your luggage is there, and I haven't heard as many quote unquote horror stories as we used to. So I would say over the last 3 years, significant strides have been made in those aspects of timeliness and arriving with your luggage, not just you and your luggage.
You and your luggage arriving, yes. And so that's something that I think whatever your ticket costs, and we're going to talk about ticket prices in a little while, whatever your ticket costs, whatever weather challenges there are in the islands, and sometimes there are challenges, whatever interruptions there are in one airport that leads to delays downstream for other customers, if the overall experience is pleasant, you have good frontline people, you have good flight attendants, and so on, it would give you more than 2.5 stars on TripAdvisor. So LIAT has a serious reputational challenge that they have to go out and fix. And that can only be done with consistency over time, where that quality of service improvement we're talking about is sustained over time. And that's a serious challenge that LIAT has.
Yeah, but Ray, at the same time, don't you think this could also be attributed to, in the Caribbean, there's this thing, give people flowers while they're alive. We like to criticize, but we don't like to compliment. So what you might find is the Caribbean people who are commenting on something like TripAdvisor are those who are having the negative experiences. But the people who have positive experiences don't say anything. I know I have never been on TripAdvisor and said anything about LIAT, be it negative or positive, and I've had many positive experiences. How about you?
Yeah, well, I've never been on TripAdvisor to say anything negative about any company, actually. I'm not a big TripAdvisor user from that perspective. I tend to check ratings, so I really should invest more time in giving them to help other travelers. But it's not just inter-regional travelers, Jason, who do those TripAdvisor ratings. You find it's a lot of people from outside of the region as well. And even so, that's the experience for all companies on TripAdvisor. And all companies are all sort of service industries, service companies in the Caribbean. But LIAT has a particularly bad rating. 2.5 is not great. And I think even if we just have a poll about what do you think of LIAT, from 1 to 5, which we probably should do, what do you think of LIAT? 1 being terrible, 5 being great. I think a lot of people have a bad impression of LIAT, and LIAT have a reputational problem. And whether it's directly within their control, whether some of it is legacy issues, LIAT is going to have to invest in changing the way the flying public feels about them. And that's a significant
challenge. Let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think that is easier to change, or not even easier, cheaper to change by starting over?
Kind of like when Cable and Wireless went from Lime to Flow. And people like me still call them Lime or Cable and Wireless anyway, because...
Yeah, but I'm just saying that it's going to cost so much money to change your reputation if you keep the name LIAT. Like if you keep the company LIAT, you're going to have to invest a lot more than if you actually let it fold and start fresh. So they're actually, the islands would actually have to dump in a whole lot more money in trying to fix a bad problem as opposed to starting a new solution.
So, my position, Jason, is similar to what some of the other Caribbean leaders have said. I believe Caribbean leaders should invest in LIAT, and I believe Caribbean leaders should invest in LIAT because LIAT is important in many fundamental ways for what Caribbean governments are doing. The one thing I was not able to verify that I really think it's important to share is that although I've not been able to substantiate this with the evidence myself, and one of our listeners will tell me for sure if this existed, there has always been rumor around that Caribbean governments would pay some of the international air carriers to fly to the Caribbean. When we first sort of opened up our international airports and we're trying to increase air traffic to the islands, we would pay the bigger airlines to fly to the Caribbean. And we continue to hear stories about LIAT flying unprofitable routes in the islands to some countries that do not invest in or support LIAT. Now, you mentioned at the top that this is a capitalist type environment. If LIAT is flying unprofitable routes and those islands are willing to subsidize other international carriers, but are not willing to subsidize LIAT, it is my view that LIAT should stop flying to those countries. Look, if it does not make economic sense for LIAT to go there, they shouldn't unless those governments come on board and pay some money. That is why LIAT is struggling. And that's a typical Caribbean problem, Jason. We tend to value travelers and things and services and products outside the region. So we subsidize those. But LIAT that needs subsidies, instead of subsidizing LIAT and coming on board, what we have is that Caribbean governments have very high taxes and make it difficult for LIAT to operate.
That is a very difficult thing for me to argue against. I was trying to come up with how I could counteract that, but I feel you are right. But at the same time, it inconveniences a lot of the other travelers. So, for example, Dominica, Barbados, people from these islands want to go to some of these islands who are not willing to put up the money. So how are we going to get to those islands?
Yeah, and I hear you, but the point is, if it is unprofitable for LIAT to fly there, and the governments are not willing to come on board, then what justification does LIAT have to continue flying those routes? There is none. If it has to make economic sense, and if LIAT is being held to an economic standard, then LIAT must have the right to make economic decisions. And so,
by the way, airlines are generally not run for economic reasons, eh?
Yeah, but Jason, we are holding Jason, we're holding LIAT to an economic standard. We don't just want LIAT to have good service. We want them to be profitable, and we want to see Caribbean government should not put any more money in. If LIAT is being run for the service of the people of the Caribbean, then all Caribbean governments should contribute.
You know, okay, so here's my thing. One of the sayings they've always said is, if you want to become a millionaire, become a billionaire and buy an airline.
Right.
Now, in that same chain of thought, and I think this goes to the whole CARICOM, OECS, and how we just not working together. The airline is actually a service so that the countries can have inter-island exchange, not only of goods and services and people. And because of that, by right, all of them should be invested, even in the unprofitable routes, right? My problem is, and this is why I say it should be allowed to quote unquote fail, is that some of these governments need to be coerced, and you never know what you have until it's gone. So maybe they need it gone for a little while. And a lot of times we talk about wanting better for the future generations, etc. That sometimes means suffering, eh? That sometimes means we have to suffer for the betterment of our children, etc. And this is one of those cases where I think we need to take the hard decision.
You know, well, Jason, the only challenge I have with that is before I go, what I consider the extreme route of saying we should walk away from LIAT and allow it to fail is I would ask myself, have we done everything to ensure it has succeeded? And if we have done everything to ensure it has succeeded and those things have not worked, then perhaps it's time to walk away. And it's sort of the same rule that we kind of, conduct our lives with, right? why then would we want to walk away from LIAT if we feel there are very important things that we have not tried? And so one of them I know we want to talk about today is the issue of the taxes that we pay on LIAT tickets, and whether, as we consider the taxes on LIAT tickets, should we try some other things first to ensure that LIAT can be successful without the big blow up plan that you have in place. And I know you feel strongly about the taxes, and you've done some research on it. I've done some research on it as well. And I'll just give a big picture because I know you have some numbers you want to share with us. But I simply ran two tickets a couple months ahead. One from Dominica to Barbados, a round trip fare, and one from Antigua to St. Kitts. Right, the Dominica to Barbados is a 45-minute to 1 hour flight. And the Antigua to St. Kitts in the air is about 20 to 25 minutes. Gate to gate is a little over a half hour. And in both of those cases, the taxes on the ticket alone was about 55% of the cost. And I know you have an example you want to show us. And so one tangible way that Caribbean governments can help LIAT, can invest in LIAT indirectly, is by facilitating higher volume in LIAT, by reducing the taxes and allowing more people the opportunity to fly, because more people will be able to afford to fly. So I say, before we blow everything up, let's ensure we've tried every single thing for LIAT. And one of those important things is the high taxes.
Now, Ray, it is wonderful that you say this, right? And I am mostly on board with you, mostly. But when you say, have we tried everything? I think my question to that goes almost to, have we tried anything? Forget about everything. Have we tried anything? Because some of the choices I see the government's making, and I think it comes back to us as individuals. I'm not even blaming the leaders of the islands, because we the people are the ones who choose those leaders. Some of these decisions that are being made in terms of the taxes, it really doesn't come from the ministers. They get advice from people who say, oh, we should tax this, we should tax that, an airport should be sustainable, should be able to support itself. An airport should not be able to support itself. Huh? And all of these, when they build these airports and then they put these charges and it goes to LIAT, I mean, I just don't understand what is the rationale, what they're trying to accomplish by doing that. I don't know what they were paying attention to in school, if they were paying attention, because I'm not an economist. And I can see the trickle-down effects of this. And before, a lot more Caribbean people used to travel in the island. And I don't even know if it's about money. I just think the prices now to travel are just ridiculous.
Do you have that example that handy for us, Jason, that you want to?
Okay, I actually do.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so with technology, sometimes you have to fight with it. This is an example of a flight from, it disappeared. From Dominica to Barbados. And this is a random flight. I'm just gonna choose a random date, 2 random dates. And let us see what those prices work out to be. Now, if you look at it, we're actually taking the lowest prices available right now. And when we scroll down, a flight from Dominica to Barbados is 345 US. And I'm discounting the cents. But let's look at the taxes and fees. The flight both ways are 90 US dollars. The taxes and fee on one side is 56. The taxes on the other side is 108. So there's one flight where the taxes and fees cost more than the actual flight. And to me, I have a fundamental problem with that. That just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
So each Caribbean government will make their own decision on taxes. and that will affect what you pay, departure, CT, arrival, CT, and so on. And I get that. But and I don't want to get into a debate about what each Caribbean government is doing in terms of taxes, because the infrastructure that you have available as you go from island to island is different. And even if you may not be trying to recover the entire cost of running the airport, you have to recover some cost, perhaps some of your operational costs, if not a share of some of the major capital investment required.
But
That
Ray,
aside,
no, I
no,
don't
but that
agree. I
aside,
don't agree.
no, but
I
that
don't
aside,
agree.
wait a second, that aside, what I'm saying is, if you just go across all the fares, I pulled up just a couple of fares, taxes are always at least 55, 50%, very high 40% of the ticket. Taxes are very high in LIAT tickets. And I think that is stifling travel. And whether you're saying that there should be an alignment of taxes between the governments, that's going to be a little tricky because of the difference in infrastructure. But I think all taxes should be lower. That's what I'm saying.
Ray, I am saying I don't even need an alignment. What I need is governments to realize by people coming into your country, you are allowing a greater circulation of money. You are allowing foreign exchange to come into your country, which otherwise you would not be getting. When they stay in the hotel, when they buy food, etc., you're allowing your people to make more money and allowing money to circulate. That is the function of the airport, The airport is not there to support itself. And I take great issue when people try to say that, oh, the airport should be able to sustain itself. No. What the airport's supposed to do is bring in enough money in the economy so that the country can support the airport. And then you have a valid argument. If you're saying, well, we have this airport, but it hasn't made a difference because we don't have any extra services, etc., then I can see your side of the argument. But when you just have these things and say it must support itself, I have issues.
Jason, me and you, we agree on that. And the CEO of LIAT, Julie Reefer Jones, also agrees with us. And she had a statement on this. And she said, what we observe, that's a direct quote from her, what we observe is that the airports in the region are generally using travel as a way of generating revenue to sustain the airport. But it is at the point now where it is counterproductive because the proportion of the ticket that is taxes is way too high to stimulate travel in the region. That's a direct quote from the CEO of LIAT, and that is so insightful, where the CEO of this organization is practically begging Caribbean governments to see exactly what Jason just said. The airport is meant to be a vehicle for economic growth and not to be a shop where you're actually collecting money to sustain the airport itself. And until and unless our Caribbean governments see that and be willing to make those sorts of changes, whether it is an alignment of taxes and so on, whether it is a reduction of taxes as a percentage overall, or some sort of agreement, until our Caribbean governments see that, I think we'll continue to have this LIAT challenge.
And that is sad. Sad. Because we talk about regional integration, we talk about free travel between the island, but simple things like that, we just cannot seem to wrap our head around how to do it properly. Boggles my mind.
So Jason, you agree then that we should see a reduction in taxes on LIAT tickets, whether it is by some government or all governments, we should see a reduction in taxes. That's one of the things you'd recommend.
Most definitely. And I would not say all, because I don't think I have enough information on what all the islands charge. But I definitely know some doesn't make sense. And here's another problem I have. So if I'm flying to St. Lucia from Dominica, for some reason I have to fly to Antigua first and then go down to St. Lucia. The cost of me stopping in Antigua, even though I don't need to get off the plane, goes into the ticket. And so every island you stop in, everybody wants their pound of flesh. And when you do that, it just doesn't make sense. But hey, who am I?
Yeah, and that's the issue of in-transit taxes. And the LIAT CEO also spoke about that. and indicated that they seem to be making some progress in that area. The whole in-transit thing in the island drives me crazy. You leave one airport, you land in Antigua, you have to go through security again, as if somehow you miraculously picked up something on the plane or on the tarmac. And then when you leave Antigua, you land in Barbados, you have to go through security again. And the most frustrating part about that, Jason, is that a few years ago when we had World Cup in the Caribbean, all of that was gone. We were able somehow to treat inter-regional travel like domestic travel in the US, that once you leave one Caribbean port, one CARICOM port, that you were treated as a domestic travel and you never have to go through that whole tralala, that lele again. And somehow we made it work perfectly for World Cup. And then we took this great idea and we went, yeah, we don't want it to be so great. So we just threw it out. And it is so frustrating for Caribbean travelers, and it's an unattractive part of the experience that has nothing to do with LIAT, but makes the LIAT experience worse. And that's another thing we have to fix.
Now, it's funny you should say that. I remember a time I went to Europe, and it baffled me that how easy it was to go from one country in Europe to another country in Europe and not go through all that hassle that I go through from Dominica to St. Lucia. Like the whole immigration process, and even in the US as well, when you're flying between states, you do not have that hassle. And let's use your example of when we had the World Cup of cricket. We do all these great things for these people
Visitors.
coming out of out of foreign. And yes, I'm trying to be diplomatic when I say this. We do all these great things for foreign, but for our locals, for our Caribbean people, we want them to jump through all types of hoops, and it's just sad. It's just sad.
All right, Jason, let's move on to another part of the discussion. As we talk about LIAT being able to survive this, there's another question. Recently, there were articles about the pilots of LIAT negotiating a pay cut, and what was on the table was 10%, and the pilot said they eventually settled for less than 10% and agreed to take a pay cut. And then the news broke this week that the conversation now is that the LIAT employees have not taken a big enough pay cut, and that previously had taken a 6% pay cut, and that they need to take an even larger pay cut for LIAT to survive. My question to you is, should the employees of LIAT have to take a bigger pay cut?
One, I don't know what they get paid, so I cannot say. However, again, I think we can relate this back to the taxes. You want to save some of this money, cut the taxes, leave the salaries of the workers as is, and invest that money into your human resource. And that's something we don't do enough of. We don't invest in our human resource enough. Should they take a bigger pay cut? Dude, I really don't know. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much, even if you're making $1 million a day, nobody actually really wants to take a pay cut. Huh?
Nobody really wants to take a pay cut. And I agree with you. And I'm going to wade into dangerous shark-infested waters here. Because I am also not armed with the information. Except I think we know enough about LIAT to venture some guesses. LIAT has been around, we know, since 1956. Started as a one-man airline, flying a three-seater plane. And we know in LIAT 1970 Limited, LIAT has been around for many years. And we know that some of the employees have been with LIAT for a long time. And we typically know that usually creates a sort of situation where you have some salaries that tend to be at the top of the scale. Now, we don't know what those salaries are. And a lot of what I'm sharing is conjecture. So what I will say is, if there are some of those cases like that, and if it means, Jason, if you're telling me I can take a 10% pay cut and keep my job, or I can keep 100% of my salary and I don't have a job in 6 months, I'm going to take that 10% pay cut, all right? If it means that I'm going to have a job longer term. And so that's how I think we need to have that discussion. We need to really get into the LIAT affairs and really see what those costs are and if that will really make an impact. But I'll tell you one other thing, Jason, and I can see you're anxious to jump in. If we're asking the employees to make that sort of sacrifice and to take pay cuts, we cannot do that and not do other things to help LIAT along. Like have the government reduce taxes, like restructure and reorganize LIAT and work on LIAT's reputation. Because the solution to LIAT is not going to be a silver bullet. It cannot be one thing. It has to be several things. And I don't think we should be asking the employees to take a pay cut if the Caribbean governments are not all also going to come online and make an investment, and the Caribbean governments are also not also going to cut taxes, and LIAT's leadership is not going to work on the reputation. All these things need to happen in tandem. Otherwise, the employees are just going to be left holding the bag, and that's not.
And that is my problem. Right? That's my problem. I mean, sometimes it's easy to say John Brown is getting too much money, but you kind of have to look at the whole picture. And you cannot tell me I am making too much money, but yet you who have been reaping benefits every year for 50 years don't want to dip in your pocket a little bit and throw a little cheese on the table. I find that very disingenuous. And I think, again, it goes to how we select leadership and how these Caribbean governments decide they want to deal with these issues. I find generally a lot of people want to choose the lazy way out or the politically easy way out, where sometimes I tell your people we have for the betterment of society, we need to make tough decisions, but everybody just wants to make sure they make the decisions that will get them re-elected in 5 years. And that's just that we will not move forward if we continue in this way of thinking.
Right, and so something as important as interregional travel has to be beyond sort of like the political view of things. It has to be the right sort of decisions that we need to make. So I think on the second point, Jason, the second broad topic we're discussing about should LIAT employees take a pay cut, it depends, and let's see what else you're planning, because that cannot be the main thing.
The be all end all, yeah.
I think we agree on that one. The last one.
And I feel to that question, I'm leaning towards no, they should not take a bigger pay cut. Well, I'm leaning towards based on, I mean, we don't have information. And if any of our followers want to provide us with information, please send it by private message. The world does it what employees make. But let us know and we can, factor it in some of our future discussions.
Yeah. We move on, if we can move on to the third part of the discussion, Jason. Should LIAT be privatized or should we introduce competition? Currently, LIAT, we know, is owned by 4 primary governments: Barbados, St. Vincent, Antigua, and Dominica. We know a few years ago, Dominica put, I think, about $8 million in. That was a controversial decision at the time, but these are the 4 governments who are currently the primary owners of LIAT, and other Caribbean governments have been invited to come on stream, and that's the sort of discussion that is going on now. Should LIAT be completely made, when I say privatized, like run as a public company, publicly traded on the Eastern Caribbean Security Exchange, for example? And should we encourage more competition in the marketplace?
Competition, I have heard, is never a bad thing. However, sometimes your market is too small. And in the airline market especially, it is really difficult to, in our space, in the Caribbean space, our volumes are so small that I have difficulty convincing myself that privatizing is the best thing for LIAT. And it just goes to, will it serve the consumers or will it serve the shareholders? And I believe when you privatize, shareholders going to take preference over customer service. And I think we as residents of the island would suffer greatly. So maybe competition, but even then, I don't think it'll bring down prices per se.
So, Jason,
Although,
are you telling me you trust Caribbean governments to run LIAT better than a private set of business people could? That a profit-minded group of people who have majority share in LIAT could? You trust Caribbean governments more?
I'm sure you didn't let those words come out of my
But
mouth.
you're saying you have your doubt, and your doubts about running it as a company are in place. But here's one of the things that we often think. We think that the profit motive and the quality of service motive are in conflict. And I don't think they are. If you want to run a successful and profitable airline, then you have to give good service. And if you
If you
create,
have competition, if you don't have competition, you have
well,
to take what you get.
true, true. But if you have a space where it is a public company, it's publicly traded, and it is a space where another airline can come in, you remove these sort of barriers to entry, which sometimes exist, and you have this airline there operating in that space, then LIAT will have an incentive to improve its reputation, to improve its on-time performance, to be thoughtful about its pricing and so on, and its profitability, because it will need to exist and will need to attract and keep customers. So I
Right, but
think
the
there is
market is so small. The market is so small that I don't think you are going to get other entrants to challenge. And that is where, if it was a big enough market where you could see 2 to 3 other inter-Caribbean airlines coming in to challenge. I mean, in the past, we had one with Caribbean Airways. Is that that's the name? Caribbean Airways, Sanford.
yeah, that was
Caribbean Star.
Caribbean Star.
Caribbean Star. They came in and prices went down, but it couldn't last. It really couldn't last. And
But Jason, what we're doing now is we are looking at the market as it exists now. The CDB did a study some years ago. The study was called Air Transport Competitiveness and Connectivity in the Caribbean. And in that study, they made some recommendations. And some of the recommendations were to reduce taxes, aviation taxes, to reduce airport charges, to increase competition between airlines was one of their recommendations, and to reduce airfares overall. The CDB said that if all those things are done, and there were a couple of other recommendations, that by 2036, in 18 to 20 years, we would see an increase in the size of the market of up to 12 billion EC dollars, and we would see an increase of 26% in passenger load if those things are done. So I think the danger we are doing now is we're looking at an open and competitive and free market as it exists now. But if we were to put all of these changes in place, if the market were to grow 25 or 26% in passenger load, and the market were to increase by 4.5 billion US dollars or 12 billion EC dollars, then perhaps a competitive environment could exist where two airlines could exist competing against each other in a bigger space. So that may very well be possible. So we perhaps should not limit our thinking about how this could work with what exists now, because we know what exists now has been sort of a chokehold for LIAT, and that the size of the market now is just not sustainable, even for LIAT operating alone. Let's make those changes the CDB recommended, and let's see how LIAT or any other airline that comes into the space can grow and flourish in that environment.
so are you saying you are for it being privatized?
Not necessarily. It's a tough one for me. I agree with you that that we have to be careful because that's such an essential type service as well. It's almost like an important utility, like water and electricity, that there should be some government involvement in it. But I think that government involvement may perhaps need to be reduced, and we need more private capital in there as well, so that you have a mix of government involvement, so that the agenda of ensuring that the travel is available for Caribbean persons, Caribbean travelers, even in places where it is not profitable. So you have that sort of a human side to it, along with the capital from private investors who also make sure that it is well run as a business. I think a mix of the two is going to be important.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Did you study ballet when you were growing up?
I did not.
Because you seem to be balancing on the fence there. You haven't really chosen a side. I mean, do you want it privatized or not? That was a simple question.
Um, if I had to choose one, I would say yes. Let's make LIAT a private company.
And I am actually on the other side. I think if I had to choose one, I'd be like, nah, let's leave it government run.
So you're saying you will choose government. You rather have government run an airline than investors who know about running an airline. You trust the governments more. Breaking
I am saying
Wilson trust the governments more.
at this point in time, yes, damn it.
Jason, any other thing you want to say about LIAT as we wrap up this discussion?
You know, I'd really like them to make flights cheaper so I could travel up and down the place a little more, you know. Because and the other thing, the other problem I have with LIAT is the times, the time it takes to get sometimes between two places. It is so much longer. It's so difficult to travel just for a weekend, because you lose so much time in the traveling aspect of it. Because really and truly, it should be easier to go from Dominica to Barbados for a weekend or Dominica to St. Vincent for a weekend. But the way it is run, you can't leave work at 4 o'clock, and I should say you can't. There are very limited number of places you can leave work at 4 o'clock on a Friday, go away for the weekend, have a good weekend, and be back at work for 8 o'clock on a Monday between the islands. And
yeah,
I really feel that is it's a very big problem in terms of encouraging travel, because you already have the barrier of price. So if you want, you can't want to have up all the barriers. You know, one or two of them should be. Come on, dude.
So what I would say to that, Jason, is I think the biggest challenge for LIAT, and you're talking about scheduling, and I agree. I think the biggest challenge for LIAT right off the bat is reputational. And I think just by reputation, LIAT could, and by price, LIAT could improve some of its performance. I have met several people who live in the islands, who are from outside of the islands. They're from North America, from Europe, who were looking forward to traveling between the islands. And they said, oh, when I moved to the Caribbean, I thought I would have seen every Caribbean island and be off for the weekends, like you said. And they've just not been able to because it's too expensive and the scheduling is bad. And it's one way for us to be more thoughtful about our tourism product as well. Because you know, Jason, that if you pick up and you go to London or you go to somewhere in Europe for holiday, you spend all that money, you go for 2 weeks. You don't just want to see London. You want to be able to get on a cheap flight. You want to go to Rome. You want to go to Paris. You probably want to go across to Spain. You want to touch a couple of cities and really have a full experience of Europe, right? When interregional travel is so expensive, it really limits the tourist who comes from London to St. Lucia. They probably really wanted to also see Dominica. They probably really wanted to also see Barbados. But when it takes that many days out of their holiday and it costs that much, and the experience is bad, the customer service experience is bad, they go on TripAdvisor and they see the rating is 2.5, they're like, you know what? We'll just pull up in St. Lucia. We'll check out Castries. We'll check out Rodney Bay. We'll just pull up there. Yeah, it's not worth it. And then I think
even the whole airport experience, your shoes, I can't carry liquids and gel. It's like, come on, dude, go on.
Yeah, I mean, no. Well, let's not. But the
I'm just
airport
saying,
experience can be easier. The
all of
airport
that
experience can be easier, absolutely. But for me, I think the highlights has to be the price, which goes directly to the taxes, and I think the reputation of LIAT, and which goes directly to the soft products, the overall experience, the customer service, the fact that a flight is delayed or canceled and the board is still showing on time and nobody's saying anything sometimes. Those sorts of things are very frustrating for inter-regional travelers. And that's things LIAT can fix on their own.
And one of the other problems is some of these late things. Like your flight is late at 9 o'clock and you may not leave until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And like, it's almost like pulling teeth for them to give you a sandwich or, just, At least fool me and make me think you care, even though you don't really care. Fool me into thinking you care. You know, offer a juice. You
Well,
know,
unfortunately, Jason, I've been on.
natural juice, not them box drink.
What local juice you have today? Unfortunately, Jason, I've been, I think, on enough different airlines to know that's not a problem that is unique to LIAT, but we shouldn't be judging our standard and our quality by the worst service experience of other airlines.
Exactly.
So that was what was bubbling on the coal pot today. Should Caribbean governments invest more in LIAT? I say yes. Jason was a bit on the fence there.
No. I was like, no, remember, hell no.
Yeah, but we both agree that there should be lower taxes, which indirectly is more of an investment in LIAT by the governments. Should employees take more of a pay cut? Jason is leaning towards no. I'm leaning towards yes, but we both agree that we need more information before we can say that. But we don't want the employees to be the only ones making a sacrifice. It has to be several approaches to keeping LIAT sustainable. And should LIAT be privatized? Jason trusts the government to run an airline more than I do. He says yes. Government should run the airline. I say let's make it a public company. Let's put some capital in there from private investors, from the general public, and open and transparency as well. Transparency in the sense that if LIAT is a public company, we all get to look at its books and see its performance and see how it's doing.
All right. Well, that was it for the Coal Pot this week. So, see you next week.
See you next week on the Coal Pot.